This is Hansen reading to you Dhamma by Venerable Mahinda. Venerable Mahinda was ordained in 1976 under the tutelage of the late Venerable Dr. K. Sri Dhammananda Nayakathera. He has taught mindfulness and metta meditation for 45 years in over 20 countries. Currently, Venerable Mahinda is abbot of the Aloka Meditation Center in Australia, founder and spiritual director of Australian Buddhist Mission, general advisor to the Buddhist Missionary Society Malaysia, founder and spiritual director of Aloka Foundation, Malaysia. He is advisor to a number of other Buddhist organizations in Malaysia, Singapore, and Australia. Preface. The aim of this series on the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha is to highlight their great qualities and to draw inspiration for us to walk the Dhamma's path. When we are living in fear and danger, worry and anxiety, we need to seek the refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. We need their blessings, guidance, and protection. Those who have faith and devotion to the Buddha will naturally find solace in times of need. Those who have developed insights into the Dhamma will have greater awareness and acceptance of the ups and downs of life. Those who connect with the Sangha will receive the necessary guidance and inspiration along the path. Many years ago, I heard my teacher saying, Abhinayam, Abhinyatam, Bhavate Bancha, Bhavitam, Pahatabam, Pahiname, Tasma Buddhosmi, Brahmana. These words kept resonating in my mind. As I made some effort to understand the meaning of these words, I realized the profoundness of the Buddha and his teachings. I wish to share this Dhamma with all our Dhamma brothers and sisters. What little I have learned is from my teacher and his teacher's teacher. I am indeed grateful for all their kindness, inspiration, and sacrifices. Their teachings are so relevant in these challenging times. I dedicate Volume 2 in this series on the occasion of the 16th anniversary of the Aloka Stupa at Pitt's Reach in New South Wales, Australia. May all those who have helped in one way or another with the construction and maintenance of the Aloka Stupa continue to grow in the Dhamma's path and swiftly attain their liberation. May the very sight of the stupa bring peace and happiness to all. Dhamma. The word Dhamma in Pali or Dharma in Sanskrit is derived from Dhr, D-H-R, which means to uphold, to preserve, or to practice. It is a very ancient term, widely used amongst religions in India, and even at the time of the Buddha, it had many different shades of meaning. Different teachers, different Dhammas. The Buddha's teachings were unique amongst the various religious philosophies that existed in India at the time of the Buddha, around the 6th century BCE. There were two main streams of religious practice in India at that time. They were the Brahmana and the Samana traditions. The Brahmana tradition refers mainly to the trained priests who conducted rituals and sacrifices for their communities. Some had settled down in agriculture and trade, and there were some who were also wanderers. They believed in the supernatural revelation of the Vedas and held the Vedas to be supreme, source of all knowledge. Although they also used logical reasoning, inference, and extrapolation to understand the world, their basic belief system depended ultimately on the will of God, Isvara, and that of the soul, Atman. For them, Dhamma was defined as virtuous practices or good works. Social practices like observing the duties of a householder and leading a righteous way of life were also considered to be Dhamma. In other words, any teaching that preserves, practices, and upholds peace and happiness could be regarded as Dhamma. The Samana tradition is referred mainly to the wandering ascetics. Amongst the Samana, there were those who were materialists, rejecting anything supramundane, including belief in a soul and reincarnation. Some were skeptics who doubted that it was possible to truly understand the world and the self. Others were determinists or fatalistic thinkers who believed that everything was predestined according to fate. Because of the Samana, the meaning of Dharma developed from the idea of virtuous practices to mean any sort of naturally unfolding phenomena, including the natural order of the universe, such as the law of karma. All these different schools of thought were constantly quarreling and competing with each other, each claiming to be the true Dhamma. The Buddha, Dhamma. Amidst this climate of philosophical unrest, the Buddha's teachings were unique in that they were not based on divine revelation or a concoction of religious thoughts and superstitious belief. They were based solely on the development of purification of the mind through wisdom and the performance of meritorious actions to see things as they really are and not as they appear to be. From the Buddhist point of view, there are two main kinds of Dhamma. The first type is Lokiya Dhamma, which refers to the worldly or mundane aspect of Dhamma, which promotes peace and harmony within the individual, family, society, nation, and the world. However, the Buddha also gave teachings which point to the Lokuttara Dhamma, which enables one to transcend all worldly phenomena and attain to the highest bliss of Nibbana by overcoming the tendencies of greed, hatred, and delusion. The lineage of the Dhamma. For the first 400 years or so, the teachings of the Buddha were maintained as an oral tradition before they were put into writing in Sinhali script at Aluvihara in Matale, Sri Lanka, around 78 to 80 before Christ. The term Pali originally referred to the text of the Buddhist scriptures, which were also called the Tipitaka, but later Western scholars use the word Pali to refer only to the language of the scriptures. The Tipitaka, or Buddhist scriptures, were written on ola leaves, which are the palm leaves, and have been preserved until today as the Pali tradition, which spread mainly to Myanmar, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian countries. Around the 1st century AD, the Kushan Emperor Kanishka organized a Buddhist council at Jalandhar, Kashmir, which put another version of the Tipitaka into writing, mostly composed in Sanskrit. However, manuscript found in languages like Gandhari, Sogdian, and Turkish show that they were later also translated into many different languages. These traditions spread throughout Central Asia via the Silk Route to China and the Far East. Today, the Buddhist teachings are preserved as the Theravada, or in Pali tradition, and the Mahayana and Vajrayana in the Sanskrit, Chinese, and the Tibetan traditions. Owing to cultural and certain doctrinal differences, there are different interpretations found in the commentaries and sub-commentaries. However, the fundamental teachings, such as Paticca the Four Noble Truths, and Noble Eightfold Path, Karma, and Rebirth, are the same. They are also realized and authentic masters in all the three traditions. The heart of the Buddha, Dhamma. At the core of all the Buddha's teachings lies Paticca or dependent origination, which explains how suffering arises and how suffering ceases. An important aspect of this teaching is based on the principle of causality, which is explained as follows. Imasmim satyidam hoti, imasupada idam ubajati. When this exists, that exists. When this arises, that arises. Imasmim asatyidam na hoti, imassa nirodha idam nirujati. When this does not exist, that does not exist. When this ceases, that ceases. This profound insight was what the Buddha realized on the night of his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya. Dust in the eyes of beings. After the Buddha's enlightenment, he spent 7 weeks enjoying the bliss of Nibbana and contemplating what he had realized. During this time, he considered that the Dhamma he had attained was so deep, subtle, and difficult to realize that he doubted beings in the world who delight in attachment and pleasure would be able to understand it. Thus, he did not feel inclined to teach. In the celestial realm, Brahma Sahampati perceived the Buddha's line of thinking. He appeared before the Buddha and begged to teach, saying, "There are beings with little dust in the eyes who are coming to grief because they do not hear the Dhamma. There will be those who will understand the Dhamma." With this enlightened mind, the Buddha surveyed the world and saw that there were those with little dust in their eyes and those with much, those easy to teach and those difficult to teach. And out of compassion for the world, he decided to teach the Dhamma. The Buddha first turned the wheel of the Dhamma at the deer park in Sarnath, where he taught the Four Noble Truths, explaining how suffering arises and how suffering ceases. This was the beginning of his 45-year ministry, expounding the Dhamma for the benefit of beings, showing them the path to liberation from all suffering. Causality and the Dhamma. The teachings of the Four Noble Truths are in fact a summary of Paticca or dependent origination, which is based on causality or cause and effect. There is dukkha or suffering. There is the cause, there is the end to suffering, and there is the path to end all suffering. This principle of causality runs through all the important teachings of the Buddha. The same is true for all process of enlightenment. In one of the most important discourses in the Tipitaka, the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the Buddha outlines the way to liberation based on the four foundations of mindfulness. These four, mindfulness on the body, feelings, mind, and the Dhamma, have been expounded in such a manner that one can clearly see how each foundation leads to the next systematically and can be verified by the practitioner. This is especially true of the 5 aspects of mindfulness on the Dhamma, the 5 mental hindrances, the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the 4 noble truths. When the 5 mental hindrances are checked, the jhana factors arise, giving rise to the clarity of the mind to comprehend the 5 aggregates which arise through the 6 sense bases, thus leading on to the 7 factors of enlightenment. Each of these 7 factors of enlightenment condition the arising of the next, ultimately leading to the realization of Nibbana. These teachings are truly, perfectly expounded. The 6 qualities of the Dhamma. The unique attributes of the Dhamma expounded by the Buddha can be understood in terms of the 6 qualities or virtues that are recited as daily devotions in what is referred to as Dhammanusati or contemplation on the Dhamma. Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo, the Dhamma of the Blessed One, is perfectly expounded. Sanditiko Akaliko is to be realized by oneself, is not subject to time. Ehipasiko Upanayiko invites investigation, leads onward to Nibbana. Pachatam Veritabo Vinyo Hete, and is to be realized by the wise, each for himself. Swakata, the first quality of Swakata, perfectly expounded, can be seen in the very first sermon of the Buddha, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, where the Buddha taught the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. Within the 4 Noble Truths, you will find the Noble Eightfold Path, and in the Noble Eightfold Path, you will find the 4 Noble Truths. The 4th Noble Truth is the path that leads to the cessation of suffering, which is in fact the Noble Eightfold Path. The first path factor of the Noble Eightfold Path is right understanding or right view, which refers to the understanding of the 4 Noble Truths. The Dhamma is also good for you and good for others. That is why the Dhamma is perfectly expounded. The threefold training. Furthermore, the Dhamma is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good at the end. When we look at the Noble Eightfold Path, we can see it comprises of threefold training: Sila, morality; Samadhi, concentration; and Panya, wisdom. The training begins with Sila. When one is virtuous and follows Sila, then the mind is free from remorse. When the mind is free from remorse, in a chain of cause and effect, the mental and physical conditions that underlie concentration arise. This is how the Dhamma is good in the beginning. But while Sila provides a solid foundation for mental development by restraining physical and verbal actions, it does not prevent negative actions from arising at the mental level. This is why it progresses to Samadhi, the calmness and quietness of mind. Once we have gained stability in the mind, the knowledge and insight of liberation will naturally arise. This is how the Dhamma in good in the middle. As that knowledge develops, so does the insight into what is needed to break the unwholesome tendencies of greed, hatred, and ignorance, the cause of all our suffering once and for all. This is Panya, the Dhamma which is good in the end. When we realize how perfectly expounded the Buddha's teachings are, taught in a manner which is clear from start to finish, our faith and confidence in the Dhamma will naturally grow. Sanditthika. The Dhamma is Sanditthika, that is, to be realized or experienced by oneself. The Buddha taught the Dhamma based on his own practice and realization. Therefore, we too need to examine, investigate, and put the teachings of the Buddha into practice ourselves. Hence, the three important aspects of Dhamma, known as Pariyatti, Patipatti, and Pativeda, or study, practice, and realization. In order to gain a complete understanding of the Buddha Dhamma, we first need to study, reflect, and to contemplate on its teachings, theories, and principles. However, we need to be aware that the knowledge of the Dhamma we gain through these means is only at the intellectual or conceptual level. In order to translate we understand at the conceptual level into actual experience and realization of the truth, we need to apply what we have learned through the practice of Dhamma. By training our mind through meditation and applying Dhammic principles in our daily activities, that is how we will gradually come to realize the Dhamma for ourselves. The Dhamma is to be verified through one's own direct experience. Confidence in the truth of Dhamma is not about simply believing through blind faith. As one realizes the Dhamma more and more, one's conviction will naturally grow because one starts to see the Dhamma for oneself. That is how we will make greater and greater effort in our practice until we finally realize the ultimate truth for ourselves. While emphasis is placed on realization of the truth through our own efforts, we also need to recognize the role of certain Dhamma protectors and Sammaditthi devas, or devas with right view, who provide the necessary support and protection for Dhamma practitioners, protecting and helping those who are walking the Dhamma's path. The Buddha himself had the support of such devas while he was struggling for enlightenment. Lady Sujata offers milk rice. Shortly before the Buddha's enlightenment, the Bodhisattva was taking a rest underneath a banyan tree near Bodh Gaya. It just so happened that a lady called Sujata visited the banyan tree every year to offer milk rice. When she was a child, she had prayed at the banyan tree thus, "Guardian Deva of the banyan tree, if I am married into a rich family of the same caste, I will make an offering of milk rice to you each year." The prayer of Sujata had been fulfilled. As a result, she had been paying homage at the banyan tree and offering milk rice on the full moon day of Vasaka every year. Lady Sujata took great care to prepare the offering. She first let 1,000 cows graze on the wood of licorice, and the milk obtained from these 1,000 cows was fed to another 500 cows, whose milk was fed to another 250 cows, and so on, until that milk was reduced to feeding 8 cows. In this manner, Sujata obtained thick, savory, and nutritious cow's milk to prepare the milk rice. While the milk rice was being cooked, the 4 heavenly kings stood around the stove to keep watch. Mahabrahma provided an umbrella to cover the cooking pot. Sakka arranged the firewood and kept the fire at a constant temperature. Other devas, through their supernormal powers, collected nutritious essences from all parts of the world. They did so as if they were gathering honey from honeycombs hanging from branches. Then they poured the nutrients so collected into the pot of milk rice. Lady Sujata brought the offering herself in a golden bowl, and mistaking the Bodhisattva to be the guardian deva of the banyan tree, she proceeded to approach him in a respectful manner. She respectfully offered it to him and departed. The Bodhisattva then ate the offering and traveled to Bodh Gaya, where he made the resolution to sit under the Bodhi tree until he reached enlightenment. Because the milk rice had not only been cooked by Sujata, but also enriched by the help of a host of devas, the Bodhisattva's body was tuned to its perfect condition, and he attained enlightenment that very night. Akalika. The quality of Akalika refers to the timeless aspect of the teachings of the Buddha. For example, the law and cause of an effect was good and applicable more than 2,500 years ago, during the time of the Buddha. It is valid and relevant in the present day, and it will be good and relevant for the future too. The Buddha himself declared that the basic principle of causality found in the Paticca Samuppada is always present. It is not something invented by him. A Tathagata only rediscovers this principle from time to time through his enlightened mind and expounds it in a manner that ordinary beings can understand. The same applies to the teachings on the 4 Noble Truths, the 3 characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, or impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. Metta, loving kindness, that hatred does not cease by hatred, but by love alone, as well as to the Buddha's teachings on the basic criteria of sila, or morality, namely greed, hatred, and delusion versus generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. These are all timeless teachings, valid for all times. Furthermore, the timeless quality of the Dhamma not only refers to the validity of the teachings in terms of past, present, and future, it also refers to the here and now. That is, the Dhamma is to be experienced in the here and now. For example, when we develop mindfulness in our daily lives, as soon as we are mindful and aware of any unwholesome state of mind, such as anger or craving, we have already stepped out of it. In terms of the 4 Noble Truths, When we truly see suffering as suffering, the suffering ceases. When we see suffering, we will also see the cause, the cessation, and the way how it can be ceased. Realization takes place immediately, here and now. It is the same with the realization of anicca, or impermanence. While we are in training, we may experience the rising falling of phenomena in 2 or even 3 moments. But as we develop the sharpness of mind, we will experience udaya vaya, or rising falling, in just a single moment, not as rising and falling. That is how akalika, the timelessness of Dhamma, can be understood, in terms of the here and now, as well as in terms of the validity of the Dhamma in the past, present, and future. The unconditioned. In fact, the true experience of Dhamma is both timeless and inexpressible. It is an unchanging, unconditioned principle known as asankata Dhamma, which we commonly call Nibbana. There are also other words used to describe asankata Dhamma, including the deathless, the unborn, the uncompounded, peace, purity, refuge, liberation, and so on. But it is actually indescribable and inexpressible in conventional language based on our ordinary minds. In contrast to the unconditioned asankata Dhamma, there is also sankata Dhamma, which is conditioned truth. This is a relative truth which is true on the basis of certain causes and conditions. An example is our assumption that the sun will rise in the sky every morning. This is conventionally true, but when we really stop to think about it, it is dependent on causes and conditions. In the same way, we assume our human life will continue day to day, but this actually depends on conditions such as the availability of food, water, oxygen, and so on. The Buddha Dhamma contains both the Sankata Dhamma, conditioned truth, as well as Asankata Dhamma, the unconditioned truth. Both these aspects of the Dhamma are timeless in nature. The principle involved in the Four Noble Truths is the principle of dependent origination, or causes and conditions. The realization of dependent origination brings us to Nibbana, the state beyond all suffering, the unconditioned state. This is why we say both the principles and the realization of the Dhamma, the conditioned and unconditioned Dhamma, are timeless. Ehipassika is often translated as come and see, or come and verify for yourself. It can be explained in the sense that when we apply the Dhamma in our own lives, we will begin to experience a sense of peace and bliss, and there will be a strong urge to reach out to others to share our experience, inviting others to come and see and experience for themselves. This will be experienced by a true Dhamma practitioner. It also refers to the spirit of investigation, the will to understand both the conditioned and the unconditioned truth contained in the Dhamma for ourselves. The spirit of investigation is well illustrated in the Buddha's advice to the Kalamas in the discourse known as the Kalama Sutta. The spirit of inquiry. During the Buddha's time, as now, people were confused by the myriad religious beliefs expounded by different religious teachers who exalted their own philosophies and denounced those of others. Hence, the need to carefully understand the Kalama Sutta, which was given to a certain tribe known as the Kalamas, who were confused over the various schools of religious thought at that time. The Kalamas approached the Buddha to ask how they should know what is true and what is false. This is what the Buddha said. Ma anusavena, ma paramparaya, ma itikiraya, ma pitasam padanena, ma takahetu, ma nayahetu, ma akara parivita kena, ma diteni jana, kantiya, ma babarupa taya, ma samanu no garuti. Do not accept anything on mere hearsay, thinking that thus we have heard it from a long time ago. Do not accept anything by mere tradition, thinking that it has thus been handed down through many generations. Do not accept anything on account of rumors, believing what others say without any investigation. Do not accept anything just because it accords with your scriptures. Do not accept anything merely upon supposition, that is, merely upon logical reasoning. Do not accept anything merely upon inference. Do not accept anything by merely considering appearances, that is, merely by reasoned contemplation. Do not accept anything merely because it agrees with your preconceived notions. Do not accept anything merely because it seems acceptable, because many people have the same view. Do not accept anything thinking that the ascetic is respected by us, and therefore it is right to accept his word. After expounding the above 10 points that should be rejected by one seeking the truth, the Buddha laid out the criteria of acceptance based on the 3 wholesome roots and the 3 unwholesome roots. The Buddha asked the Kalamas, "Is greed good?" They replied, "No." Then the Buddha said, "Avoid it." "Is anger or hatred good?" They replied, "No." Then the Buddha said, "Avoid it." "Is ignorance or delusion good?" They replied, "No." Then the Buddha said, "Avoid it." Then the Buddha asked, "Is generosity good? Is loving kindness good? Is wisdom good?" To each of these questions, the Kalamas replied yes. So the Buddha advised them to avoid greed, hatred, and delusion, and to practice generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. Greed, hatred, and delusion, and their opposites, generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, form the criteria for judgment of right and wrong, or good or evil in thought, speech, and body actions from the Buddhist perspective. The Kalama Sutta is thus rightly accepted to be a unique charter of religious inquiry. Opanayika. Opanayika is another quality of the Dhamma as it leads onward to Nibbana. The Buddha explained the natural process of liberation based on the principle of causality in this way. It is natural, O monks, that freedom from remorse arises in one endowed with virtue. Happiness arises in one endowed with freedom or remorse. Joy arises in one endowed with happiness. Calmness arises in one endowed with joy. Bliss arises in one endowed with calmness. Right concentration arises in one endowed with bliss. Seeing things as they are arises in one endowed with right concentration. Cessation arises in one who sees things as they are. Detachment arises in one endowed with cessation. Freedom or liberation arises in one endowed with detachment. Just as one good thing leads to another, the peace and blissful experience of the Dhamma will naturally lead us to prioritize our activities, and we will gain the courage to give up the lesser, fleeting happiness of sensual pleasures for greater or more lasting spiritual happiness until we experience the highest bliss of Nibbana. In a similar way, when one develops faith in a teacher, one will naturally want to listen to him. Upon listening to the teachings, one will want to understand more. And as our understanding grows, we will want to know how to practice and so on, leading us further and further along the path to liberation until the final goal. Pachattam Veritaba Vinuhi. Finally, the Dhamma is to be realized by the wise, each for himself. Pachattam Veritaba Vinuhi. Just as medicine only works if it is taken and consumed by ourselves and not by others, the Dhamma too needs to be practiced and realized by oneself. However, a certain degree of wisdom is required in order to appreciate the Dhamma and be able to apply it in our daily lives. Only when we develop a little wisdom to realize the fleeting nature of sensual pleasures will we be able to let go of the lesser happiness for the greater happiness. In fact, the whole practice of Dhamma depends on the wisdom of right view or right understanding. If we have the right view or understanding about the nature of our minds and the true nature of our lives, then we will naturally develop right thoughts, right speech, right body actions, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This is the Noble Eightfold Path which will enable us to put an end to all suffering once and for all. These 6 qualities of the Dhamma are very important for us to understand if we wish to make progress on the Dhamma's path. We need to recollect and understand their meaning and know how to apply it in our daily lives. That is how we will realize the Dhamma as truth, true pariyatti, theory, patipati, practice, and pativeda, realization. Recollecting the 6 virtues. Understanding the uniqueness of the Buddha Dhamma, we should listen to the Dhamma not only with respect and gratitude to the Buddha, but we should also recollect the Buddha's true purpose in teaching the Dhamma to show us the path to liberation from the cycle of birth and death. We should remember that such sublime and well-expounded teachings of the Buddha are not always available in the world. As such, we should listen to the Dhamma whenever the opportunity rises. There are times in the world's cycle when such Dhamma is totally obscured from the minds of ordinary human beings. You may have heard that we are in a Dhamma declining age. It is not that the Dhamma declines, but people's minds are so distracted by worldly and mundane knowledge that few take the time and effort to understand their true self and the true meaning of life. Dhamma in practice. The whole teachings of the Buddha or the Buddha Dhamma can be summarized as follows. Sabha papasa akaranam, kusalasa upasampada, sacitta pariyodapanam, etam buddhane sasanam. Avoid all evil, do good, purify one's own mind. This is the teachings of all Buddhas. Understanding the criteria of the three wholesome roots and the three unwholesome roots which the Buddha explained to the Kalamas, we avoid unwholesome or unskillful actions and perform actions which are unwholesome and skillful. Avoiding evil and doing good lays the foundation for the development and purification of the mind. When we meditate, we naturally become aware of our thoughts, speech, and body actions. When we recall the unwholesome actions that we have done in our lives, guilt and remorse will arise. Our minds will be disturbed, and we will not be able to concentrate properly. That is why the Buddha thought that we need to develop a good moral foundation by avoiding evil and doing good. However, from a Buddhist perspective, avoiding evil and doing good alone is not enough. Good moral conduct will lead to positive karma, which will support us in the future, but the development of wisdom is essential in order to gain our final liberation. That is why the purification of the mind is necessary, to develop the wisdom, to see things as they really are and not as they appear to be, to experience the truth of the Dhamma for ourselves. Modern Dhamma. In the meantime, listening to Dhamma, discussing and sharing Dhamma are all meritorious activities that will benefit both ourselves and others. In the contemporary world, there are many ways we can skillfully utilize modern communication methods in addition to the more traditional formats to bring the Dhamma to a broad range of people. We should also remember that in propagating the Dhamma, our own actions and behavior will be an example to others around us. Ultimately, we need to put the Dhamma into practice in our daily lives by being mindful of our own thoughts, speech, and body actions to reduce and eventually to overcome the tendencies of greed, hatred, and delusion. This will in turn have a positive influence on those around us. Dhamma protects the Dhamma practitioner. Dhammo have rakati Dhamma charim, Dhammos chinnu sukham avahati, essa nisamso Dhamme suchinne, na dugatim kachati Dhamma chari. Indeed, Dhamma protects the Dhamma practitioner. Dhamma well practiced brings happiness. Never to an evil rebirth goes the Dhamma practitioner. This is the advantage of well-practiced Dhamma. The Dhamma is a protection for us. Firstly, when we cultivate the worldly Dhamma, we are protected from the negative effects of evil actions. And when we realize the supramundane Dhamma, we will be protected from any kind of suffering, because our minds will be free, no matter what trials or challenges we may have to endure. The parable of the raft. It is important to understand that the purpose of the Dhamma is to help us reduce and ultimately overcome or greed, hatred, and delusion. If we become overly attached to the Dhamma, whether it is the text, the words, or the meaning, it can become a hindrance to the purification of our minds. The Buddha declared in a number of different suttas, Sabbe Dhamma Nalam Abhinivasaya. All Dhammas are unworthy of attachment. How should we understand this? The Buddha once compared the Dhamma to a raft used to cross the ocean of samsara to reach the other shore, Nibbana. The purpose of a raft is for crossing safely over an expanse of water. Having reached the other shore, we would leave the raft behind and not carry it with us wherever we go. In a similar way, we depend on the Dhamma in both its mundane and supramundane aspects to cross the ocean of samsara, but once we have reached the other shore of Nibbana, as the Buddha advised, we should let go even of Dhammas, to say nothing of non-Dhammas. Conclusion. Practicing the Buddha Dhamma will benefit us on a worldly level by generating the merits for us to have a peaceful and prosperous life and to be reborn in a human or heavenly realms. But if we don't engage in the Dhamma with the motivation to be liberated from samsara, Dhamma practice will not ultimately lead us out of suffering. A peaceful and prosperous life is a support to enable us to practice for something higher. We should always appreciate how fortunate we are to live at a time when we are still able to access the Buddha Dhamma, and when there are still a few authentic teachers wandering around the world. We need to make good use of this opportunity to plant the seed of enlightenment in our own hearts, as well as in the hearts of the many. We can do this by making the right connections with the noble ones, Sangha members who have good practice and who are able to guide us along the path to liberation. The significance of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. The Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha are known as the three jewels or triple gem because of their preciousness. They are the best and most reliable source of refuge. When we are ill, we will visit a doctor and take the medicine prescribed to cure our illness. In a similar light, in order to cure our suffering in samsara, we can look at the Buddha as the doctor, the Dhamma as the medicine, and the Sangha as the one who administers the medicine. The blessings, guidance, and protection of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha lead us to success, not only in our worldly pursuits, but also in the pursuit of our final liberation and enlightenment. We all have the same basic awareness as the Buddha, whether we believe it or not. The difference lies in its clarity. The Buddha's awareness is vast and crystal clear. Our awareness is clouded and tainted by greed, hatred, and delusion, along with all their ramifications or manifestations. As we continue to grow in faith and devotion to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and keep on doing good, avoiding evil, and purifying our minds, we will slowly remove the layers of cloud that have been obstructing and obscuring us, and eventually attain the awareness and clarity of the Buddha. Yo Dhammam Pasti, So Mam Pasti. He who sees the Dhamma sees me, the Buddha. Acknowledgements. The idea of producing this series on the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha came about after the completion of the first stage of the 2021 Aloka Online Dhamma course, which commences with these three topics. I wish to acknowledge all the support and encouragement that I received from Sister Sumitra, who came up with the idea of conducting the Dhamma course and chaired the team of dedicated volunteers. My grateful thanks to the organizing committee, donors, and everyone who has assisted in one way or another to bring about this series of booklets. Venerable Mahinda.